Hi, folks. How are you doing tonight? We appreciate you joining in. We've got a great podcast for us tonight. It's different than what we've done in the past. This is Mainline Executive Coaching ACT. It is all about leaders taking the right actions, doing the right kinds of things to bring that culture together, to make that culture happen. And we are going to go into a deep dive into the big end of the pool on this particular thing tonight, this discussion. We're going to be talking about cross cultures. I'm here tonight with my partner, Rich Barron. I'm Michael Bailey, and our guest tonight, he's been with us before. We're excited to have him back, John Burt. He's going to be kind of heading up the discussion here as he dives into this and explores the treasures and also the deep monsters in the dark end of the pool about what could go right and what could go wrong. So let's get started here. Cross cultures working together in the same place. John, let's open this up. We'll give you the can opener here.
All right. Well, hey, Michael and Rich, thanks again for having me back. It's always a pleasure to come on and talk to you guys. And you are touching one of the topics that's near and dear to my heart, and that's working cross cultures. I spent nearly 10 years working and living overseas in Western Europe. And I've worked with cultures mostly in Western Europe, but I've also worked with Japanese cultures and Asian cultures in my work as a management consultant. So I'm really familiar with some of the faux pas that you as a leader can have working with folks from other cultures. And I think that what we were talking about just before we came on live, guys, is that leaders are most likely, all leaders are most likely working with folks from different cultures as part of their team, whether they're managing that global team or they have expats on their team, or even they have U.S. citizens or green card holders on their team that are coming from different cultures, bring different values. And so this is something that's real that leaders need to take into account when they're working with their teams.
Okay, so what I was doing some training in one organization, and I was talking to a fellow there, I believe he's from Hong Kong, in fact, Rich, where you spent some time. And I said, what's one of the things that is like an obvious culture difference here in America as compared to Hong Kong? And he said, well, one of the things that you do here that we don't is like, for us, yes is this and no is this. It's does that get to be a little confusing? Sometimes it does. I mean, that's just a minor thing. That's just something that we take for granted, right? So what is it? So if it's going well, right? If it's going well, and I think Rich, you've worked in those organizations where there are people from different countries that are working under you. When it's going well, what do you see? I mean, how does it work if it's going well? And then let's talk about when it's not going well. What are some of those symptoms or telltale signs?
Well, John, you wanna jump on this one?
Oh yeah, certainly. I'm more than happy to, Rich. Thanks. So things when things are going well, of course, you're going to have a really high performing team. Everyone will be contributing. There'll be a high degree of trust on the team. There's going to be good camaraderie. There's going to be a good enthusiasm and motivation amongst the team members. But I can tell you, one of the things you're going to get when it's not going well is people are going to be silent. People are going to be withdrawing, or at least maybe not sure about how their contribution can be beneficial to the team. They'll feel like outsiders on the team, and they'll be less likely to speak up in a meeting and share maybe a really great idea. I have just a quick funny story. When I first went to Finland, my first assignment overseas, I went into a room that was full of folks from mostly Western Europe, mostly Finns that were in the team, and I delivered a 45-minute presentation with no questions. At the end, I finally said, "Are there any questions?" I'd never delivered that presentation, that particular presentation, without hundreds of questions, right? And taking probably about 2 hours. And I packed up, left the room, and later that day, one of the managers came over to me and said, "John, don't think that really hit the mark in there. They're just, they were not prepared to probably respond in the way that you wanted them to respond." Right? And it was a good learning experience for me that I needed to first understand how they were, what expectations that they had, and the sort of the cultural values and how they communicated, and probably needed to change my style to be able to get the most effect in that particular setting.
So what's a leader required to do to start figuring out an individual or a number of people on their team that don't come from the same culture, what's the kind of homework they're going to have to actually go out and do? Here, we're talking about, shoe leather. What do you have to go out and do?
Rich, you want to?
Yeah, one thing I would suggest is some team building activities outside of the workplace. Go to dinner, spend some time talking to people, and just one-on-one getting to know people. Break the ice. Ask questions and be truly interested in what they got to tell you about their culture, where they came from, their families, their background, their history, what it was like in the city or the town they grew up in. Some of the most rewarding team environments that I've ever worked on were with cross-cultural teams where you had so many different people from different backgrounds and walks of life and cultures that and bringing all their own beliefs and their own interpretations of what it is you were working on to the table. And it's a proven statistic that cross-cultural teams are 35% more effective than teams that are not diverse. That's a proven statistic. And so it's a very rewarding experience. And especially going out to dinner. Sometimes, I had some people from Somalia on a team. So we found a Somalian restaurant locally, and we went there and they explained all, the cultural, aspects of what we were doing. And it was phenomenal. It was great. You get to break that ice.
I think that's a great suggestion, and it's something that I've used when most of my teams were when I was working overseas, and I've carried that back when I came back. Just this idea of letting the locals treat you right, show us what's interesting about this particular area, this particular the cuisine that you might eat, the type of drink that might be a local drink that they might have, or going to a local museum and having some sort of an event where people can interact and the home team, if you will, can show you something that you might already know, and that kind of puts them in a power position, right? They'll feel more confident that they're able to explain their culture to you, and that gets them out of their shell a little bit. I think another thing that you really need as a leader, you need to do with your teams, and that is to get to know the people who are on your team. Really understand what their backgrounds are, what type of experiences that they bring, understand a little bit more about their preferences, how do they like to work, especially when you have somebody that's new that's joining your team. But if you're a new leader joining the team that's already exists, get to know those people. Schedule one-on-ones, whether in person or in Zoom, but get to know the people, understand what their strengths and perhaps what their weaknesses are. What are they looking to get out of working on the project, or their expectations that they have? Those types of things are that's like for the basic step for a leader when they're working on a cross-cultural team.
Let's dig a little bit deeper here. And being the leader, you're going to do those kinds of things, hopefully. I mean, you'll just be the person that's going to be more proactive about it, go and have those conversations, get to know each other on that personal level as well as that professional level. What would you do, though, in terms of every team has its influencers? People that just seem to be able to influence and connect with other people, and they just kind of have that street moxie of knowing what to do. And they're probably going to do that anyway with these new team members that are bringing together a new team. Would you take the time as a leader to encourage? I would like you to make sure that you're being proactive about this. You're part of the team here. You lead and you go out there and start making those connections to help those that are kind of maybe a little more shy, a little bit more introverted. So you're getting it going at another level, and maybe even talk to the people that let's say you're in Finland and you've got a group of Finns that you're working with, as well as a group of Americans or people maybe from Canada or just from this pond. Would you go and say, okay, tell me the people that are the connectors. Tell me the people that are the ones that are really into relationships and building relationships, so that you've got that other level of them being proactive and going out and reaching out and creating those connections. Would you do that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that there are going to be people in the group, whether it be culturally or maybe just the dynamics of the people who may already know each other, that wind up taking a dominant position in the team. And I think that, as a leader, you need to be managing that to make sure that you don't have one person who winds up dominating the part of the conversation. One of my learnings was, of course, that Americans tend to be very bold and much more forward in presenting their idea. They think everybody needs to hear their idea, which is fine. But I think in a lot of cases, what it does is it shuts down people from other cultures because they don't know that their idea measures up, right? And especially as an American or U.S. leader, when I would be in a room, they almost assumed that I only wanted to hear those points of view. So as a leader, you need to make sure that you're calling on people, or if you know that person, if you already gotten to know that person may be a little bit shy. Make sure that you are trying to include them in a way, not to put them on the spot, but create an opening for them, or go visit with them afterwards and say, hey, do you have any additional ideas you'd like to share? I know that you may not have felt very comfortable in that meeting, but did you have anything else you want to share? Because you can get some great ideas from people who are maybe a little bit more reflective in their thinking, or maybe a little bit shy or a little more reserved in their thinking. You just have to make sure as the leader that you're not allowing, an individual or groups of individuals to dominate the conversation at the expense of getting the ideas of the others.
Yeah, that's excellent. How about this notion? There are some cultures that have a higher sense of hierarchy or classes. And that's just kind of the way they are. They think that way. They've lived that way. They've lived up in those cultures. And then they come here to America where it's not so much that. How do you deal with those folks that bring that kind of class or hierarchy culture to get them to start integrating into the workflow? Or how do you allow them that space, but somehow get them so that they're more involved and not just maybe standing off a little bit?
Yeah, that is in Europe, and maybe in some of the Asian cultures as well. I find that there are some class differences, cultural class differences, education differences that play out in how people interact with one another. I have a quick funny story, and I worked in Germany for a while. I was introduced to a new client. I got introduced to the CIO, and I walked in with my German partner, and walked into the room, and I immediately took off my jacket, my coat, and I sat down at the table. And he was absolutely mortified that I had just kind of made myself at home in this guy's office, and this was the CIO of the company. But it was 6:00 in the evening, and he was walking around in shirt sleeves and talking on his phone. So I just assumed, but I shouldn't have assumed, right? But it was one of those situations where you had somebody who was a pretty senior guy within the company, and I was probably used to a little bit more of the U.S., maybe even California-based kind of a casual setting. And to be honest, I never felt like I had offended him. He was always very friendly toward me. But I think in certain cultures, you do see an expectation of people in different levels acting in those roles and not challenging people. So you have to be really careful to understand those dynamics when you're bringing ideas forward, when you're trying to get those ideas forward, and you're perhaps breaking some of those barriers yourself as a leader. Not everything is quite as egalitarian, if you will. It's not just who has the most brilliant ideas. Sometimes in other cultures, you just have to be careful about how you bring those ideas out.
I remember there was a time going back a while that when we started doing more business with Japan and their American executives going over to Japan, I remember hearing something about they actually spent like 2 weeks with these Americans going over the protocol and how to do things, working with the Japanese in a way that it wouldn't offend them or upset them. That it was that big of a deal, that it's no small thing that you could blow a deal because you just didn't know.
Yeah. And one of the things we haven't talked about, of course, is that, although there are a number of native English speakers in the world, English is not the number one language spoken by people in the world, right? So when you have a cross-cultural team, you have a little bit of an advantage as an English speaker, because most of the meetings are being held in English, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody interprets things as well as you intended, as well as quickly as you intended. I tend to talk very fast when I get going, And if you're using slang or you're not using proper English, which they may have been taught either by a U.S. English professor or maybe a British English professor, they may take some more time to understand and interpret. So I think with the Japanese is a good example. You have brilliant people who are running some phenomenally large corporations, and in a lot of cases they just need time to digest what you've said, and they cannot. In some cases, I've some have been educated in the U.S. and they're fine with this, but it's not like a general thing where you walk into a meeting and you can just start talking a mile a minute and everybody's going to understand you. It just doesn't work that way.
I've got a good experience with that. When I was younger, starting about 14 years old, I started learning to speak Cantonese, and over the course of the next 4 or 5 years, got very what I felt was very fluent in the language. And then I ended up going to Hong Kong. And it was interesting because when I got there, I realized that I wasn't, that fluent at all, because there are more casual ways to say things, more formal ways to say things. And depending on what environment you're in, and you need to understand, what form you can use. One of the things that I found out too is that, and you mentioned slang, you really got to understand when you start speaking another language. And I thought I was doing really well until I actually was immersed in the culture and found out that, there are certain things that you just don't say. I mean, things that, it's just like in English, someone saying groovy, that's really groovy, slang, and people are going to look at you like, what does that mean? Or I haven't heard that, for 45 years or something like that. Same thing in other languages. You need to be completely aware of maybe some of the slang that you're going to be saying, and it might be misinterpreted. Mm-hmm. We can learn languages from whatever source. We can learn to speak Spanish, French, German. You can learn that at school, whatever. But I honestly can say, if you're not totally immersed in that culture, stick to the basic form of what you're going to be speaking in that language, because you never know how that's going to be misinterpreted. The other thing I got to say is, before I went to Hong Kong, I had someone give me some very good advice. They said, difference is not bad, it's just different. Have an open mind. Mm-hmm. And when I got there, man, it was so much fun. I loved learning about all the different religions and different cultures, and where people came from, and just about sitting down and eating dinner with somebody, the different things you can do with your chopsticks, for example, things that are only reserved for maybe funerals, or certain things you just can't do because it's not accepted, where here it would be completely normal. But I think that's where it gets down to getting to know the people on your team, their cultures, learning about it, and truly listen to what they tell you, and try to welcome that into what you have there.
Yeah, I think that the thing that's really always worked for me has been to be curious, regardless of what culture people come from. They love to be asked about the things that are going on in their life, right? And to somebody who's very curious and asks, what's the I've heard this, but what's the appropriate culture, what's the appropriate technique for using this, or to do this, or saying this? People love to jump in to help you, right? And then you learn a lot, because somebody will tell you the background story in terms of how that custom, if you will, came to be. So if you're a leader and you're working with these multicultural teams, cross-cultural teams, ask questions. It'll really help you. It'll help you to understand, but it'll also help you to build trust and relationships with the folks on your team.
Yeah, I gotta say something about that. Be careful who you ask how to say certain things. I did this once. Asked how to say something in Spanish to address a big group of employees, and what they told me to say was, I guess, pretty colorful, if you will, and not exactly appropriate. And I'll tell you, the looks that I got when I was trying to say these things. And this guy's on the side just laughing his head off. And I'm like, what did I just say? And I'm not going to repeat what I said. But I think be careful where you get all your information.
True. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think if you can be flexible and just roll with it a little bit, I think you know, again, there are so many benefits from working with cross-cultural teams, multicultural teams, that it outweighs some of the additional work you have to do as a leader to get that high performance. And in some cases you are going to make mistakes, but be humble about it. I think that you'll build trust and rapport with your team members, and hopefully that's the last thing they'll remember is and probably somebody pranked you and put you up to something like that. But you'll get past that, and I think you build a healthier and more cohesive teams.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna get close to wrapping this up here. A couple things before we sign off here. One, we've been talking about here are the things that you should do, and the great ideas, great conversation, great ways to start being curious and start getting those connections going, building a new kind of a team through communications and just getting to know each other. Let's say that a person is right now enmeshed in this cross-cultural kind of a situation, and they know it's not working. They're not quite sure what's going on. What would be some of those symptoms or telltale things that would say this is what you look to see what's going on? Let's just start with that sense of diagnosing what it is. What would they see about why this might not be working?
Rich, you want to?
Yeah, I would say the first thing that you need to be as a leader on these teams is to not let conflict fester. You need to resolve conflict immediately, because if there's any conflict going on in your team in a cross-cultural environment, diverse environment, there may be some misunderstandings that you need to get in and resolve immediately. So don't be one of those leaders that sits back and allows conflict to go on in one of these teams. You need to be able to get in there and help resolve it and get on the road, because there could be some misunderstandings that you can help resolve. And so that's one of the cautionary parts of working on a cross-functional team. Do not let conflict fester. Resolve it immediately.
That's a really good point. I think another area is just the active listening. In terms of, you will assume that you heard somebody and what they meant, but it may or may not be accurate. So just the active listening and the questions and making sure that you're confirming the real intent, the real communication that somebody's provided you. And sometimes that you're so quick and we want to move on so quickly to the next step that we assume that everybody has agreed. Well, if you're active listening, you may find out that not everybody has completely agreed, or that you may have misinterpreted something that somebody has said, and they're trying to provide you with a different message. So that active listening and questions is making sure you're confirming the communications is really important.
So some of the things that you might start taking a look at would be just the productivity of the team. Is the productivity of the team matching what it is that you expect? And if it's not, start that curiosity, start those conversations. Another thing might be just the cohesion of the team themselves. You can feel there's a sense of resistance. There's a little bit of protectionism. There's a little bit of we're not coming together. That sense of we're not coming together. Therefore, what's the problem here with trust? So those are the kinds of things as a leader you can start noticing right away. It's easy to start jumping in and doing these things. I think that we need to do an analysis at the beginning and say, so what's not working? Let's be specific, so that when we go and have those conversations, it's not a generalized. Part of it's going to be, generalized. Who are you? Let me tell them a little bit about yourself or where you're from. That kind of getting to know each other. But then there's that other level. It's deeper problem solving. It's a deeper work with the relationships as a leader and helping people to open up and, start sharing, start building that sense of trust and camaraderie. And this is truly a team that we're either in on or we're going to have to make some changes. But let's give our best effort here at first. But we need to take a look at the essentials, just the basic. Let's get to the basics here. I'm going to sign off on one thing here. And John, thank you so much for bringing your conversation, your expertise tonight, all the great things that you always bring to us. I want, if you would please, Rich, I know you had a very interesting situation with some employees that I think they were from the same country, but different parts of the country or something.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to have to talk a little bit about managing people who see themselves in more of an adversarial or co-worker kind of a situation. Share with it. It's an amazing anecdote.
Oh, yes. I worked with some employees, had some employees that worked in the organization that I managed that were from Vietnam. Okay. And they worked side by side for a long time. And they were always talking back and forth to each other. And I always thought that it was friendly conversation and whatnot. I had really no clue what was being said until one day, two of these women just absolutely went at it right in the front lobby, just full on fist fight. And I thought these ladies were friends, for forever. I had no clue because I didn't speak Vietnam. No one came and told me what was going on because they were afraid to really get in the middle of it. But it turns out I got an interpreter in there who helped me understand what was being said. And he explained it to me. He says, this person, her family's from North Vietnam. This person, her family's from South Vietnam. For them, the war never ended. That Vietnamese, the war in Vietnam. And so this whole time they were calling each other out. They were calling each other names. They were making threats, personal threats to each other while they were working all day long. And this went on for a long time until it finally they'd had enough of it and it exploded. And so that was a very interesting lesson for me, if you will, to understand there are, even within cultures, there are, cultural diversity within cultures.
So I would say that's two times you got caught not having a person you could trust being the translator.
Well, I had asked. Here's the kicker, Maikel. I had asked, what was being said because I was just curious because I spoke Cantonese and I really liked Asian languages and stuff like that. Some of the people, they wouldn't tell me. They're just saying, oh, they're just having a conversation. Well, it turned out that this conversation, they were afraid to get into the middle of it and didn't want to be the person who was ratting them out, if you will. And so,
just a word to the wise. You know what I'm saying? The police were called in. Did somebody go to the hospital? I mean, it got to be kind of rough, didn't it?
Yes, it did. It got to be. It was. It got hurtful. Trying to break them up, and it was bad.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things where if you're too assumptive about what's happening, you might just see it as just general conversation. So it's always just better to be having those conversations with people. Try to understand the dynamics, and especially if people have worked together in the past. Are things in a healthy spot for the team, especially if you're working on long projects where there's intense work effort, maybe some pressure for some deadlines and things like that. You can really very quickly, some things can spiral out of control like they did with you, Rich. But I think it's the leader's responsibility to kind of really keep their ear to the ground and be listening all the time for how the team's getting along, the interaction, the interpersonal relationships, or in a business sense, making sure that things are not going to go off the rails.
Exactly.
Yep, exactly.
All right. Excellent work. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it very much. They want to get hold of John Burt. How do they do it, Rich? Help us out here.
Oh, there you go.
Just like this.
Thank you. Put the website up there. And you can also call me if you'd like at 720-235-9370. Love to have a conversation about, if you're a leader that's working with a multicultural, cross-cultural team and you need some help in terms of how to interpret what's going on, or maybe some tips in terms of how you can work more effectively with those teams. I'd love to share with you some of my personal experiences working in Europe and across the globe.
Excellent. Thank you, John. All right. You take us home now, Rich.
All righty, Executive Leaders Act, ILEC.com. That's where you can find Maikel and myself. And, you know, if you're working on a cross-functional team and you're just starting, or a cross-cultural team, and you're just starting down this road, give one of us a call. We've all of us have had a lot of experience working with these teams, and maybe we can save you some time and help you learn what you need to do and give you some pointers and help you on the road to your additional leadership skills. So once again, thank you very much. And you know, Maikel, our podcast. We've been lucky because it's gone global. We've ended up with a global audience, so we have so many people from different cultures that I know are listening to us. And so we want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being supporting us. And till next time, be safe, take care, and we'll see you again.
All right, folks, all the best to you.
Thank you, guys.